Hello and welcome to another episode of Fan View. Today we will be talking about lost media, part two of our two-part piece. Last week we looked more at previous eras of lost media and mainly focusing on Doctor Who. And this week we are going to be focusing much more on the digital age. So my name is Sarah Cooper. I am joined, of course, as always, by my lovely co-host, Aaron.
Good evening, Sarah. This is an interesting one for me because I know a lot about missing media of the past, but not so much missing media of the digital age.
It's a very fascinating subject, and it's one of those things where it is just an entire huge amount of media just was never backed up, and so there is just nothing there. So yeah, if you'd like, we can jump straight into it. Are you happy to do that, Aaron?
I am. This is going to be an interesting discussion.
Beautiful. All right, so we're going to be just starting with the destruction of time into the digital realm. So basically, we're going to be focusing on things that have been recovered specifically as a result of the internet and things that existed only ever in digital spaces. So the type of things we're thinking of will be websites, online content, games, and even a couple of other things, a couple of other slightly more niche things like lost media that is very much sensitive and dependent on a medium, and maybe the medium is gone for whatever reason. So we will also be, however, looking at one of Aaron's favorite topics, the Mandela effect. So Aaron, do you want to tell us a little bit about the Mandela effect?
The Mandela effect is an interesting effect, and it's coined from the actual person, Nelson Mandela, where people have different memories about what happened to him. Some people remember him dying in prison, and some people remember him becoming president of South Africa when he was released. And it is a weird thing where people absolutely positively believe they remember things one way, and it's actually another way. And one of the most obvious Mandela effects where everyone says, oh, I don't remember that at all, is from Snow White, where the witch says to the mirror, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Do you remember that?
Yes, but that's not what she said, is it?
She doesn't. She actually says, magic mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? But no one remembers her saying that growing up. And that is an example of the Mandela effect, where a lot of people, almost the group conscious, remember something one way, but it's actually something different. And people have theorized that when the Large Hadron Collider turned on, it affected reality. But it has become a phenomenon, and it's partly to do with how our memory works, and it could be other weird reasons, but we're going to look at that in relation to missing media as well.
Yeah, look, it's one of those things where I'd love to get into it, but at the same time, we've got to be careful not to get too into quantum immortality and things like that. It's probably a little bit too heady for this particular time slot, so we won't go too deep down that rabbit hole.
Talking about this, I'd like next series, I'd like to do a whole episode on the Mandela effect because it's a really interesting discussion, but we won't go sideways into it now. It's just something we'll touch on tonight.
Yes. So basically, it comes down to Christie has said the books said mirror mirror, while the movie said magic mirror. I would believe that to be true, but the actual very strange thing is there's a lot of official Disney merchandise that says mirror mirror, including a film from I think early 2010s, maybe might have been 2011 or so, called Mirror Mirror, and it was specifically based on the Disney film. So if that was the case, if it was never in the Disney film Mirror Mirror, then why was Disney referencing Mirror Mirror so often? And that's the big question. But yes, again, we do need to try and stay not too close to that one because, as you said, it is an entire episode in and of itself. So basically, what we're going to be looking at is a lot of Mandela effects is basically the result of flawed memory. So if we want to bring the slides back up. So yes, is what is going on when we've got things that are missing? Is it flawed memory? Is it a creepypasta? Is it a hoax? Because a lot of Mandela effects turn out to be basically people being manipulated. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's not intentional. Sometimes it's one person said something as a joke, everyone said, "Oh, I remember that," and suddenly it's taken on a life of its own. There's also the great world of creepypasta. And if you don't know about creepypasta is a Reddit invention, basically. Creepypasta is creepy things that get reposted. So stories and tales that are not true, but they are designed to make you uncomfortable. And there is a lot of creepy pasta of, the lost episode of this show, which made children go insane. And we will be getting into a little bit of that in a little bit. But yeah, moving along, we will also be looking at, of course, the history of games and how many games have been lost. And this is something that I care very strongly about as somebody who is a big gamer. But there are just so many games that are not available now, that they were made a long time ago, and for whatever reason, they were never backed up. And as a result of it, they are gone. Aaron, do you have any experiences of games that you wanted to play again and they're just gone?
I had games growing up on the Commodore 64 that I have tried to find examples of that I cannot even find a reference true. One of them was a sore point for me because I got it for a birthday when it was something I didn't want, and it was a cheap and nasty knockoff game, and it was Monkey Magic based on the series Monkey. And you flew around on a 8-bit cloud and you beat up demons with your 8-bit monkey staff, and it was actually quite a good game. And it was on one of those, you buy a box with 5 different games in, the super cheap stuff that was really generic. And that was a good game, and I cannot find any reference, no emulator, no nothing, no company where it came from, nothing like that online. And when I was looking for this episode, there are quite a few games like that, and some games that have got reviews in magazines and are on, obviously more importantly, were sold not to a few people. They were on big page sort of ads selling these things, and there is not an example that's turned up. So I found a website, and there are 55 Commodore 64 games that are sort of the most wanted, that there are reviews, there are ads for them being sold, people remember playing them, but not a single copy exists.
Wow. So it's one of those things that you're certain it existed. So you're certain it's not a Mandela, but there's just
Yeah.
no references online.
Well, on that slide that we were looking at, there are actually magazine screenshots of the games that exist, and there's reviews of them online. On the bottom left there, you can see there's actually someone's highlighted a games ad where you could send away and buy the data sets with them on. So they definitely existed. The even weirder one is the picture above that, which is a cartridge from the Famicom, which is one of the early Nintendo systems. And I
Mhm.
found this fascinating. Nintendo were in the schools in Japan, and there was actually school cartridges where the entire class would plug in their cartridge, and rather than play a game, it was like educational sort of
Oh,
word puzzles and
wow.
things like that. And I had never ever heard of them, and they are one of those things that had kind of slipped into almost urban legend with people remembering them growing up. But they would be the kind of thing that once they were outdated, the schools destroyed them. Nintendo never kept any of them because they obviously weren't commercial. They were made for schools. And
Mm.
about 3 of these cartridges have turned up, and you can see the emulators online. But for Nintendo collectors, they are one of the rarest cartridges there are because they don't exist. They're never going to turn up, in someone's garage because they weren't released for homes, and schools threw them out. So even big companies like Nintendo never kept an entire back catalogue of everything they did.
Mm. So we are seeing more and more of that these days. Nintendo actually releasing to the for the first time, we are getting games released to a Western audience that were only ever available in Japan. So we are seeing those on the Switch store and things like that, for Switch members or Switch Online members and things like that. But it is very much a case of there is just all this media that if they didn't back it up and nobody took it home with them, then what's the chance of it ever showing up again? And it's so incredibly sad because it comes down to the debate of, are video games art? And and again, what is worth saving? What is worth, cataloging and trying to hold on to? And a lot of this stuff, they just didn't think that it had any value. And so people didn't back it up. And that is just heartbreaking for me.
Well, the crazy thing is this lack of backing thing up and keeping stuff happens on stuff just a few years old. You would think people would have learned. And I think the thing with popular culture, just because you don't like something or I don't like something and the game is trash, there is at least some person in the world that was their first game or their favorite game, even if there's only one. And that makes it valid to archive and keep this stuff for the future. But a lot of it isn't. And you can understand there's storage issues, there's cost issues, there's actually employing someone to archive stuff. And if you're an independent game company in the 80s that maybe had one or two releases and then you went under, probably no one is there to keep your game, and it is really rare. And this isn't just games, but this is other things as well. So we're going to have a look at some
Yeah.
of the other stuff too as we go through the episode tonight.
There's also the thing to keep in mind that a lot of the early game media, so things like floppy disks, very prone to corruption and very prone to, just stopping working. And as a
Yeah.
result of, and cartridges as well. And as a result of that, you do get things that they did back it up and they did do their best, but then something's gone wrong. They've lost the master copy. They've gone to pull out the backup and it's gone. So a actual very recent example of this is just last year, the Mass Effect Legendary Edition came out, and it was a remaster of all three original Mass Effect games. And in the first Mass Effect game, there was a DLC. I have temporarily forgotten the name of it. It was basically you went to the moon and you were trying to, you was trying to stop the moon from crashing into
Yep.
Earth. From memory, I did play it, but it was a long time ago. They lost all copies of this. Now, this was the game that you could still get a copy of it, but the problem was they lost the originals. And so it got to a point where they had to make a choice between releasing the game as it was without this or rebuilding that entire game from scratch. And the cost was just too overwhelming. So they're like, well, we could do that. We can't afford to. And, EA Games wasn't going to pay them to foot the bill for that one. So
Yep.
unfortunately, that complete legendary edition, not so complete.
Well, it is interesting with digital media because people went over to digital media because it was meant to make life so much easier. There is an example, it's a Doctor Who example, when they were releasing the Doctor Who books, that one of the books was due out. It was about three-quarters complete, and the author erased the entire thing and couldn't get it back off their hard drive. So they had to go back to square one and write it again, and it blew out, and it came out a year after, and it was a bit of a drama because all the books were meant to come out in order and stuff like that.
Mm.
And the thing with digital media, a lot of people have backed stuff up and tried to keep it by putting onto digital media, but the actual formats move along so fast. Sometimes, if you've got a photo in an album and you scan it onto a disc, better off keeping the photo in the album. There's going to be, I've read, a big black spot at the beginning of the 21st century because we back stuff up onto media that doesn't actually exist and doesn't work anymore. And this happened to me. My parents had a lot of Super 8 films and video films, and they professionally got it filmed, took it to someone so they could put it onto a digital format. And they've got all the discs and none of them play on anything anymore because we're talking, the original Windows kind of formats that just don't work. So you can't really recover anything from that era because unless you've got the old systems, it's too hard. So if they want to do it, they've got to go back to the original physical media and do the whole process all over again.
And that is absolutely something that happens as well. And even just going back to games, sorry, I'm going to keep doing this. Going back to games, it did happen with, I actually remember growing up, there was a DOS game my sister and I used to play when we were very young. It was, I believe, called Dark Ages.
Yep.
And it was just a DOS game. And it was always a little bit buggy on the system that we had. I don't even know what type of system we had. I was very young. And each time we upgraded to a new computer system, our IT guy would back up and move all the games over with us. But slowly, each and every one of them stopped becoming playable. But the first one to go was Dark Ages. So Dark Ages was lost to the Dark Ages. And for years, I wasn't able to find any reference of this game. I couldn't find anywhere to play it. I tried all different DOS emulators. I finally found someone has made a version of it. So they basically backed it up and put it online so you can play it online. So it is now available, but that was just in a personal way. That was lost to my sister and I for, our whole childhoods, essentially.
Well, the other thing about that is originally when game companies, in particular, I guess Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo were releasing consoles, the first couple of generations were backwards compatible, but then they worked out that they don't make as much money if everyone can play their old games. So in some ways, they're responsible for the loss of stuff by not making stuff backwards compatible and playable on the new systems that they come out with, because it isn't something that they want people to do. And it's interesting, I don't know if you've grabbed any. Every year there's these new mini systems or new retro consoles that have, the 50 best games on kind of stuff. And they're never ever the games that I think are the best games. They're obviously the ones they've been able to get their hands on. And I read an interview somewhere where they said, how come you've got 5 good games and the other 20 are crap? And they're basically like, so hard with finding the rights to these old companies to get them and put them on and reuse them, that it's basically, we can use the pool of games from this company or that company, and if the best ones aren't on it, stiff, you can't, we haven't got access to them. So sometimes even the companies that want to release this don't have access to them. The companies that own the rights can't do anything with them.
And then there's also the case, I do actually have a few of those systems. And one of the other things you get is, because they are essentially running on an emulator, they are not running on the original hardware. And especially when you consider something like a Nintendo system, there's a memory card both in the cartridge and also the memory cards that are in the console itself. So essentially, for a lot of them, they were working. They had 2 separate processes essentially running at once, basically. That's a very messy way of describing it, but basically what's going on. And as a result of that, they don't emulate well. And so there are certain games that they might have the rights to and they might want to put on there, but they can't get them to work using current technology without them being incredibly buggy. And as a result of that, they don't want to put it on the system because they don't want to ship a product that people are going to, call them up and say, hey, this is faulty, I need a refund. And
Well,
that's another issue.
the other thing you see is you'd see people making homebrew consoles. Well, they'll get a Raspberry Pi,
Yes.
and they'll have different games and different systems all on the same console, and you might get 5,000 games, more than you can probably ever play in your lifetime on the one system. And sometimes these are a better way to actually preserve these old games than the companies that originally made them.
They are, and those are great as well. But often you will actually find the same issues with the emulators not working. So you'll often see there are certain games, especially Nintendo 64 games are particularly famous for it. Nintendo 64 games are very hard to emulate well. They often have huge amounts of lag. They often have huge amounts of downtime. And it is just a result of the way that the hardware worked. And so when they're emulating it, it's no longer working the way it was designed to work. And so it causes lag, it causes frame rate issues, all stuff like that. Anyway, let's bring up the slides again, get back on track. So we've got digital Mandela effects.
Yeah. So I've probably put too many of these together for the episode because there's a lot of them. But again, we're talking about the Mandela effect, where people remember a game one way and it's absolutely not. So, Sarah, I don't know, with you being more of a gamer than me, if you remember these things one way or the other. But the first things we're looking at is Sonic the Hedgehog, and you've got the major villain. Do you know what his name is?
What's his name? Dr. Evil Man, the mustachio guy. Yeah, I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
Well, it's interesting because he had a different name in Japan than he did from in America, and then they merged it together. But his first name is Ivo, but a lot of people swear it was Ivan for years and years and years. And he is one of the Mandela effects, where all of a sudden people said it was Ivan and it's actually Ivo. The middle one there I'd never heard before, but it's to do with what was actually said in a game. And the lines were, "This isn't what I intended for you," and then you knew exactly what you were doing. And apparently a lot of people use this and quote this, but it has never been said in any of the games that it's related to. And it's one of those things that has, yes, it's Dr. Ivo Eggman Robotnik, but a lot of people remember it as being Ivan. So that's one of the sort of, it's not really lost media, it's just where did this come from? Now, have you heard of the middle one there, Sarah, with those quotes?
The Overwatch one.
Yeah.
I have heard of that one. Yeah, I wasn't a big Overwatch player. As somebody who very much drank the World of Warcraft Kool-Aid when Blizzard came out with another famous title that looked like it would take all my money and time, I resisted.
Yes.
So,
And the last one on there was just from Donkey Kong Country, where there were levels and situations that people remember from the game that actually weren't in the game, to do with Diddy Kong, actually. So
oh,
there's a few Mandela effects, but like I said, we'll go into it later. I probably put too much effort into Mandela effects for an episode that isn't really about them. Do you have really anything to say about the whole memory and memory cheats and memory warps and false memories?
so there are certain ones like the Ivan versus Ivo. That type of thing I generally put down to flawed memory because
Yeah.
those are ones where it's very, very understandable that a child would get that wrong. Now, I personally have some I don't not dyslexia, but I have dyslexia adjacent things. So I have things like, reading Harry Potter growing up and pronouncing Ginny as Guinea, even though I had an aunt Ginny. And, somehow believing Hagrid was a giant blue monster and who was bald. And that is never in any way referred to in the text, but that's how my mind as a child took it in. So there are things like that where I just put it down to brains being brains
Yeah.
and us kind of wanting to simplify the world around us. But there are things like, that quote in the middle section with Mercy, where it doesn't really make any sense because where did that come from? If it's never been in any media, what was the origin? And those are fascinating.
Yes. Now there's
Yeah.
another one. Most of these, because they're gaming, I don't remember, but there is one that I dead set remember,
Mm.
has something that's being changed. And if you've got the slide there, this one,
Mhm.
with Rainbow Road. Now
Yes.
apparently, on the Nintendo 64 version of Rainbow Road, you could not fall off of it because there were guardrails for the entire course. Now the first time I had Mario Kart was on the 64, and I remember that being an impossible course to complete because you just fell off of it all the time. Do you have any memories about that one?
Yes, and I have the same memory of falling to my death constantly. There is a joke that among my friends that whenever I play any game, gravity is my nemesis. The only thing that really takes me out in most games is gravity. I'm good at other things, but if there is an option of dying by falling, I will. So I definitely remember Mario 64 and falling to my death in Rainbow Road.
Well,
Also, I see you've got the Pikachu with
yeah,
without the mark, the with the mark on the end of his tail and without. I distinctly remember doing a high school assignment in graphics class where I had to make a bunch of art of different characters, and I remember painstakingly putting the tip on the end of that tail, and then to be
yeah.
told that that doesn't exist. It's very upsetting.
Well, that is crazy as well because it even looks more correct to me with the black tip on the tail, and it apparently doesn't have it. But even more Mandela stuff to do with the gaming is apparently there weren't dual Pokemon. Sorry, apparently there were dual Pokemon in the first version of Pokemon on the Super, not the Super Nintendo, on the Game Boy, that no one
Mm.
remembers, and everyone remembers it being introduced in a big innovation, but it's always been there.
Huh.
So that is another really weird one as well.
Kirsty is asking, could the quote have been a leaked private joke between makers? That is entirely possible. It is entirely possible it could be something like a Twitter conversation or something like that, a caption on an official artwork. But it's one of those things that as nobody's ever been able to find definitively where it came from,
Yeah,
it remains a curious missing bit of information. Now,
yeah,
yeah, look, trying to moving on a little bit from Mandela's, it is one of those, well, tying it back in, let's put it that way. Mandela's can be cases where we've just forgot things or we've traveled dimensions. We don't know. It could be one of the two. And that's the thing, that a lot of people are looking for media that may not actually exist. So there are a lot of cases out there of lost media that they were never real, and they were thought up by somebody and they convinced themselves it was true, and then they've told a bunch of other people that they thought that that was true. and as a result of it, there is a search going on for something that was never in existence. An example would be the Shack. What was it? The Shack movie? Not. Oh,
The
is it
the genie, the
the
genie
Genie
one.
movie?
Well,
Shazam, or no, Kazam? One of
well,
those.
here's the weird thing about that.
Mm.
I distinctly remember going and seeing The Fifth Element and coming out of The Fifth Element and seeing a standee for Shaq as a genie going, that's a weird thing. But so I actually remember that as something that was real.
So that was Kazam, yeah. So that's a very interesting one. And apparently there is another movie, which is another athlete playing a genie. So people think that people have just got confused, but that is a very curious one. Um,
Yeah.
the Rodder said Mandela effect more like Deep Roy effect. And
Yeah.
to people that don't know about the Deep Roy effect, Deep Roy was in Star Wars. Nobody remembers Deep Roy being in Star Wars. A lot of fans, including Aaron and Rod, were very, very surprised to find out Deep Roy was in Star Wars, but apparently he's always been there.
Well,
That's a very curious one.
we knew he was in Star Wars, but we didn't know he was Yoda.
Yeah,
That was the big
yeah,
one, where for years and years and years they said, no one's in Yoda, no one's in Yoda. Then suddenly Deep Roy was in Yoda. But there you go, we're getting sidetracked.
we are.
Um, so I think the next one, as you were sort of introducing,
Mm.
is something that people have memories of, and people may have hoaxed, and they've hoaxed it so well it's at the point where even the gaming community do not know if this is real or not. But apparently, do you know the story behind this one, Sarah?
Yes, I believe this one is a creepypasta that
Yeah,
took on a life of its own. Much in the way that, there are certain people overseas that believe drop bears are definitely real.
yeah.
And if anyone from overseas is watching, drop bears are definitely real. Don't ask questions. So this is Polybius, which was a game that apparently the government hid and covered up because it gave people seizures, nightmares, and made them murderous, which is very fascinating. Aaron, what do you know about Polybius?
Well, the interesting thing is, I think it works so well because there's sort of a mixture between real life and fantasy in there.
Yes.
The story, what behind it is basically what Sarah has said, where governments were dropping games into different arcades to see if they could use sort of mind control techniques on people and what kind of things they could do. And it was meant to have given people seizures and was meant to have affected people's minds and things like that. And apparently, this was factually tried in the Portland, Oregon area in some arcades. And they've actually got freedom of information where people remember Men in Black wheeling in and out arcade machines, but they weren't actually mind control stuff. They'd actually put recording devices on because the FBI thought arcades were a den of drugs and all this kind of stuff. So they thought if they could bug it, they'd be able to find who the dealers were and stuff like this. So absolutely true. There were some games that had recording devices in. Also, in the early gaming industry, there were some games that did cause epileptic fits and seizures. And there were some games, they were vector graphics ones, because they had the flashing, a lot like Missile Command and stuff like that. If you were an epileptic, it could set off a seizure. So there were reports of people going in, playing games, having a seizure and coming out of arcades and collapsing. And one person actually did die from one of these seizures set off by a games. So those games were quickly taken out and modified and disappeared. And I think what Creepypasta did, they took these real life urban legends, which were based in some fact, and then built a more sinister and more complex story around it. And because it's like based in fact, it took off as something that was believable and could happen. And so you've got people, of course, when they read this, they go, oh yeah, I remember stuff like that happening. I think I remember that cabinet. And so even gaming investigators can't get to the bottom of whether it was real or not, to the point where they have found back during that time patents of things that were very similar, patents being taken out for this type of stuff, but no one's actually tracked down anything but that blurry black and white picture of the cabinet. And you can see in that thing, it's so infamous, it made into an episode of The Simpsons as well.
Yes. So it's very fascinating, and I think you're definitely I definitely, in my opinion, you're right that it is one of those things where it's a mixture of fact and fiction that somebody has created a very believable but far-fetched narrative. It's one of those perfect, it's a perfect conspiracy theory because it's got just enough reality in it and it's just outlandish enough, but it's just believable enough that people go take it and run. So
Yes.
no, it is definitely a very good one. And I think also a lot of people are getting confused about the Pokemon episode that aired in Japan that gave over, I think it was over 50,000 children had seizures. And that was the introduction of Porygon, which fun fact, that's Rod's favorite Pokemon. Rod, who is my partner, and in the comments. So there you go. He his favorite Pokemon kills children. So moving right along there. We've got an example of digital Mandela effects, and I think there are a lot of these. Aaron, do you want to take us through some of this?
Well, this is kind of the same thing where people are remembering things that didn't happen. But apparently, in the original Mortal Kombat, you could unlock a character called Red Robin. Now, the pictures there are not actually of Red Robin. It's a mock-up made by someone of what people remember. Some people are absolutely dead set. They remember playing with this character either in arcades or on home versions, but it has never, ever existed. It was never more than a rumor, and the creators have said it wasn't unlockable and it isn't a hidden character, but people absolutely swear that they used this character. I never played the game, so I didn't know about that one. And then there's the game in the center where sometimes you get like quotes like "Mirror, mirror on the wall" that everyone thinks they know so well. And there is a quote in the game about, and it's apparently a bit of a joke with gamers where it is used often. Again, I don't know it so well. So again, Sarah, maybe you can confirm this, where people are retired because then I took an arrow to the knee.
Yes.
But the actual line is, then I took an arrow in the knee, except everyone says this suddenly changed where it was to the knee, to the knee, to the knee. And then suddenly the game was saying in the knee and everyone like, no, that's totally wrong.
Well, I've definitely traveled through dimensions then, because I definitely remember the Skyrim quote, I used to be an adventurer like you, then I took an arrow to the knee. So if that changed, I choose to believe that that is a case of the subtitle changed, but the voice recording stayed the same, maybe? I don't know.
This is the infuriating thing about Mandela effects. You can go and get your original version out that cannot be changed and cannot be tampered, and you will put it in and it is different from what you remember.
Damn those mind control agents.
I know. Damn that Hadron Collider.
That's what they did when they started it spinning. So this is one of another thing that we do also need to remember, that the internet isn't forever. And I think more these days people are backing things up a lot better, and technology it's more sturdy than it used to be. Corruption is less common than it used to be. But for a long, long time, people just kind of assumed there was always that thing that people would say, once something's online, it's online forever. You'll never get it down. Well, and then there are things that you actively search for, and they are just not there.
Well, I am sure everyone has done this before, where they have read a really interesting article or found in a really amazing internet page, thoroughly digested it, and then not bookmarked it and sort of forgotten about it because they've got everything out of it they could. And then maybe a year or two later, they've heard something that's relevant and said to someone, there's this amazing page which is all about that. And you cannot find it, and there is no history of it, and it is not there, and it doesn't matter how much you search, it is gone. It is really infuriating. Here's another really interesting thing about that and how the internet lies. You know, when you do a search and it says, we've come up with 2.1 billion hits for this search. So you go, okay, and you start going next page, next page, next page. You hit about page 8 and it says, that's the end of the results. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I haven't looked through 2.8 billion. And the interesting thing, I found this when actually when Gene Wilder died. And I wanted to put a tribute up on my Facebook page. So I Googled Gene Wilder photos, and I didn't like any of the ones that were coming up. So I went about 3 pages in, and there were no more than 3 pages of different photos. And then all the photos were exactly the same. Now I have a lot of stuff on Gene Wilder. So I pulled out a book on Mel Brooks, and there were probably more different pictures of Gene Wilder in the book on Mel Brooks than there were available online. And I thought, the internet is touted to be this all-purpose repository of knowledge where you can find everything. But beyond the first 3 or 4 popular results, there's really nothing there.
It's one of those things that without getting too deep into it, look into the fact that Google used to have in their credo used to be "Do no evil," and that was removed a couple of years ago. So look into that. But otherwise, it's just a fact that people view Google as the internet these days. We rely on it to be the place where everything can be found, and it's not. It's
No.
designed to take you back to other Google websites so they continue to make money. So it's one of those things where once upon a time, maybe Google would have all of that information on there, but it doesn't want to show you any of that anymore. So while that information is somewhere on the internet, without it on Google, because Google is essentially yellow pages of the internet, how do you find it? Unless you know the exact URL, unless you have a link saved, unless you've got it bookmarked, where is it? And yeah, it's one of those things that it's very upsetting because we rely so much on this company, but they are not doing the job they once did.
It's interesting because a lot of the other search engines have died, but I used to use one called Ask Jeeves, and you would Google.
Yes.
Google is interesting. It's like a Hoover, where when you're talking about searching for something, you say Google. But I was on Ask Jeeves, and I would Google something there, and it would throw up totally different results from what Google would, and the results there would not come up on Google.
Now, I do remember Ask Jeeves. I also remember Dogpile. I remember in school getting a printout page of websites to use to search for things.
Yeah.
And I definitely remember Ask Jeeves was one of them. Now, moving right along to our next slide, what else is something that it really does destroy a lot of things online is, as we talked about, the corruption of data, but there's also closed servers. Now, what happens with a lot of online content these days, and this especially happens with games, is it is put on a server. So online games, if you are playing a game with multiple other people online, that is on a server. Now, that server is at the end of the company that made the game or the company that published the game. It is not in your computer. It's not like a LAN. If any of you guys remember LANs, LANs are basically you use a cable to connect your computers to each other, and it's on your end. A server is something that is completely online, and it is completely out of your reach, completely out of your grasp. Now, a lot of games and a lot of information have gone because basically as a result of these servers being taken down. And this happens because servers are incredibly expensive to keep online. And when they stop making money, companies who they don't view these things again, they don't want to, they're not archiving them. They're not viewing them as historical things that need to be kept up just for, I can't remember the word, but they're one of those things that they're gone, and it is devastating. And as somebody who did grow up, I grew up on Habbo Hotel and a website that I can't find any trace of anymore called Coke Music, which was a Coca-Cola website where you made music tracks, and I loved it. All these websites, they are just gone. There is no trace of a lot of their stuff anymore. There was a lot of games that, like, I remember there was in the mid 2000s, there was an MMORPG that was you played as a superhero and you could create your own superhero, and completely gone, all the servers down. And the thing is, servers go down so fast these days. Games that came out 5 years ago, their servers are gone now. It's not something that it's 20-year-old games that we've lost. This is things that are happening very quickly, and it is just so devastating, especially when you are somebody who enjoyed the game.
Well, the other thing is with these type of things, often there is a lot of time, but also a lot of money invested by the people who are playing this game. And is it fair that people who pump so much money into something and have played for years and years and years, just because it doesn't become profitable anymore, they're suddenly cut off, everything they've achieved is gone, and they can't access anything anymore because it wasn't on their computer? As you say, it was on a server. And sometimes there'll be multiple servers around the world, and I presume that so it plays faster in different areas. And a game's in trouble where the company starts with one server, gets up to maybe 6, and then suddenly the servers start dropping off to their back down to 1 again, and you're like, I wouldn't be subscribing to much more of this because it's going to disappear. And one of the games that did that was Star Wars Galaxies, which no is not still going. And they kind of knew that this was going to go. So there are people who tried to preserve as much as they could and put it on their own servers and keep the game going. But Star Wars Galaxies is, if you could explain what a massive multiplayer, what is it? It's
MMORPG, so massive multiplayer online role-playing game.
Yeah. So how would you describe that? It's just like, I guess, playing Dungeons and Dragons with an infinite number of people online.
Yeah, so it's essentially an online game with a massive amount of people. So that's why it's massively multiplayer. So as opposed to there are online games which have small limited servers. So say
Yes.
you get matched with 5 other people and you play with those 5 other people for the match. Massive multiplayer, an MMORPG, I'll just simplify it. It is a giant server where you are interacting with potentially hundreds of thousands of other people.
Yeah.
So, for example, World of Warcraft, that is the MMORPG I am most familiar with. It's the one I grew up with, and it is a giant game where when you run into somebody in the world, so there are NPCs which are not playable characters, but when you run into somebody who is a playable character, they could be anywhere on the planet, and they are actually there. And sometimes you'll go through cities and there will be so many people in the city in one instance that it will cause lag on your computer because there are just so many people there at once. So yeah, it's just a lot of people online. And
Yeah.
as a result, those servers are expensive to maintain. So once they are no longer popular, they don't want to keep them up anymore.
Yes, and the one that Dags just put up about, we've got a slide of, and that's the Star Wars Galaxies. Now, I never played this, not because I didn't think it was cool. I knew if I got into this, I would not have a life. And the interesting thing about Star Wars Galaxies is they launched it, and they launch expansions, which of course they do to keep people interested in the content. But you could do things like you could become a bounty hunter or a Jedi or an Imperial, but you could also open a shop and decide that you repaired droids or spaceships. And if that was your kind of thing, people did that and they collected money, which is virtual money. And you would see accounts on YouTube, or not YouTube, eBay saying, you can buy 200,000 credits from me for $50. So you could actually make money in the real world by selling stuff in the virtual world. And there were tutorials that I saw online that said, if you become a Jawa and you open a junk shop and you do this and this and this, it's like a money-making thing. And you can just be channeling this every day. And it's like playing one of those, I guess, click and come back the next day kind of thing that used to be games on Facebook. But you're actually making in-game money that you can transfer to anyone else in-game, that you can sell in the virtual world, and as soon as you've got the person's ID that you're going to transfer it to. So people were actually making money off of this. I guess it's ingenious doing that kind of thing as an extra way of supporting themselves. So it's not just a game, it worked on different levels for some people. I think Second Life is still going. I'm not sure though.
I'm actually not certain about Second Life. I have a feeling it is, but
Yeah.
if it's not, it will be because it's rolled into essentially the metaverse, which is the thing where all the people with Bitcoin go. But as far as I know, Second Life is still around. I very briefly played it in the mid 2000s, but it was a very expensive place to be, and I distinctly remember shops where you could buy genitals. That is my main memory of Second Life. But yeah, look, it is very sad when you see things like that. Now, moving on to another example of when it is very sad, you get something like Neopets. Now, Neopets, that was my childhood. That was my early entrance into the internet. And unfortunately, Neopets was a website built on Flash. Now, if you don't know what Flash is essentially games and media were made in Flash. A lot of actual cartoons that you will watch from the mid 2000s, they were made in Flash. It was very popular as an animation software tool, but it also was all those sort of digital interactive websites that you'd hover over a button and a sound effect would play. They were likely made in Flash. I actually know how to make websites in Flash. Unfortunately, you can no longer make a website in Flash because Flash no longer exists. But as a result of that, and also the death of Shockwave, which was a Flash media player that existed prior, even earlier, all of these games and a lot of this website pretty much went out, it blinked out of existence in just a split second. And for myself and a lot of other, millennials born between, 1990 and 1997, I'd say, this was absolutely our childhood. This was the website we spent all of our parents' internet on. This was the one we snuck onto at night when we said we were meant to be sleeping. This was it. And all of these games just slowly vanishing and slowly becoming unplayable. It is absolutely heartbreaking for someone like me to see, I've got to admit.
Well,
Um,
I thought
yeah.
it was Flash will save every one of us, but no, Flash saves every one of us, not the Neopets. It is interesting that this was a deliberate decision as well, wasn't it? Where
Yeah.
they could have kept going and they could have kept updating Flash, but they just decided not to.
No, it was one of those things that Flash had actually become sort of, it was an old tool. A lot of people, while they'd started out with websites made in Flash, Flash websites took a long time to load. They were very heavy on media, and also certain things had been replaced. Like YouTube players are so excellent these days. Greg has told us Second Life is still going, and he is currently logged in. So good for you,
He's
Greg.
actually looking for a cheap pair of genitals right now.
Oh, there we go. He's got to update and get the newest. This is a family show, so let's not go into that. So yeah, it's very much one of those sad things where websites had moved away from Flash because it was a big issue with Flash wasn't able to work on mobile devices, and everyone these days, half the time, very few people actually are using the internet on a computer these days. Most people, for the most part, are just logging in on their phones. And so you've got this wonderful tool that was able to make all sorts of things, including fantastic animation, but it doesn't work on phones. And they could have spent the money to get it to a point where it was able to work on phones and where iPhone supported it. But that would have cost too much. So they decided instead just to shut the whole thing down. And so we lost a huge amount of content in one fell swoop. And a lot of people online, especially developers that maybe they'd made things early in their careers, but they'd moved on from it. They didn't think to back any of this up. They didn't think, let's go back and get that, because maybe for them it's not, they're not particularly nostalgic. They don't particularly care about it. But for kids like me, I grew up playing Hannah and the Pirate Caves, which was basically it was a fantastic game where you were running through pirate caves as I don't even know. It was fantastic. It was really great. And these games, they're just gone now, and you can't play them anymore, and that is a little bit devastating.
Do you think how much media you think we lost through Flash going under? Do you think a lot of it is gone for good and there was no backups?
Look, it would be curious to find out. I think we would have lost, we would have lost absolutely terabytes and terabytes and terabytes. I can't remember what the thing bigger than a terabyte is, but we definitely lost that. It would be one of those things that some of them would still be backed up, but
Yeah.
it's one of those things that you have to have the Flash player on your computer. Thank you, Dags, for petabyte. So we've lost petabytes worth of information.
Dags is often on those petabyte sites.
Why? Why? Anyway, so looking at backwards compatibility, it is the question of, will games carry over? And we've had lots of examples of consoles coming out that have given us backwards compatibility, but generally they like to monetize it. So I mentioned earlier the fact that with the Nintendo Switch, you can have an online, a Nintendo Online membership. Nintendo Online membership gets you access to a giant catalog of free, available to play games for a low monthly cost of, there's a bunch of tiers. I can't remember what the exact cost is. But those games, for a long time, were not available. And if you're not willing to pay for them, even though you might have originally paid for them back in the day, you can't access them unless you have a working whatever device they were originally available on. Yeah. Aaron, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm really cynical about the whole thing with this. I think if I have supported a company by buying their product for almost my entire life, for them to then say, we want you to buy more product rather than be able to use the old stuff as well is pretty crappy. The other thing that I find really disappointing is region locking of stuff, because I'll tell you what, I would have bought a lot more from the Nintendo store if the Commodore 64 archive was available in Australia. And I'd see all these news groups going, all the Boulder Dash games are up on the Nintendo site, and I'd go there and I couldn't find any of them. And then I look into it and it's like, only available in America. You're just like, oh, that's just really disappointing. It is sad that the media is there but not available because the companies are too greedy to share it. And I don't know if it means it might as well be missing because no one can access it. But it is very cynical, especially when you hear PlayStations originally came out and they were backwards compatible, and then after a year they go, oh, we're not making enough money, let's switch it off. So everyone's after the original release because then they can at least play their old games. And every time a new, 4, 5, whatever comes out, there's a petition, make it backwards compatible. And I believe 5 is compatible with 4.
Yes.
Which is lucky because there's not many 5 games out yet. So
it's a lot better now than it was, and also
yeah,
they give you a free upgrade to if you buy a PS4 title, most games will give you a free upgrade to the PS5 version of it,
yeah,
which is very nice. But at some point they are going to stop that, and I will be very sad because I'll have to pay the extra $10 for the game.
yeah,
Um, yeah. So look, it is very fascinating when things like that happen. And yeah, look, I do remember when the original PS3 came out, for instance, and the PS3 was originally back compatible with the PS2 and the PS1 games, but then they stopped doing that. And a big reason for that was actually that the PS3 was making enough money because it was the most affordable Blu-ray player on the market. So they didn't need the backwards compatibility. No one was buying the games because they were buying it just as a Blu-ray player. So they
yeah.
might as well just make it play the current games and be a Blu-ray player. And yeah, so that was my first console. My first console. I wasn't actually. Fun fact: as somebody who loves games, I wasn't allowed a console as a child. I just played computer games and DOS games and Neopets until I was a teenager. At which point I got a PS3. So there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Anyway, bringing up the next slide, moving right along. So we then get other types of context-specific media, which are just gone. Now, these are things like iPhone games. Well, not just iPhone games, phone games. They are theme park games. They are arcade games. They are things that, for whatever reason, they are not available to the public now, and they may never be, just because nobody's ever thought to release them. Aaron, what are your thoughts?
Well, I know a lot of these things are really important to people. And you know how I know that? Because for years and years and years, a baby goat used to wander onto my Facebook page from Farmville for all my friends that were playing it. And that stopped. But there was Farmville and Cityville and Bubble
Mm-hmm.
Island and all these sort of click and point games that were really big. I remember there'd be launches of the new Indiana Jones game. I'd be super excited, and then it bore no resemblance at all to Indiana Jones, but you play it anyway. And they are one of those things where there is no other media to play it on because they were purely phone and Facebook games. And once they're gone, often they disappear really fast, as if you go to play them and they're like, thanks for playing for so many years, but we're not supporting this anymore. And that's the end of it. So I don't know if not having playable media counts as that is actually missing, because you can go on YouTube and you can probably, watch hours and hours of people playing and doing different things. So a representation of the game is there, but you can never play these things again because it's either the technology we use them on has moved on. And like we say with Flash, they're never going to go back and resurrect that. They might change the games and update them, but it's not the same as the original. Or the companies just go under, or they're not popular enough, or they don't make enough money. I mean, my monster garden got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then someone came and closed the whole thing down. So I don't know. I'm not as invested because I didn't grow up with it, but can understand from my childhood how invested I did get in different media, how upsetting this could be, especially if someone goes, this is my game, and they latch onto that and they play it for years and years, and then the company takes it away.
Look, it is heartbreaking because it's one of those things that you a lot of these games, they are free to play, and free to play doesn't mean they're free. They mean you start the game for free and then they ask you for money every 5 minutes after about half an hour.
Yeah.
But a lot of these games, you basically, by spending so much time in them, you do develop that deep connection with them. And I was somebody who did play Farmville. I played all of those games. Every time a new one came up, I played it. The Caféville, Cityville, Farmville, the Hunger Games version. There was a Marvel one for a while, and I remember spending quite a bit of money on that. And those games, they're all gone. They're all gone. You
Yeah.
can't play them anymore. There's nothing left of them, and it is very sad. But at the same time, a lot of those games, they weren't actually, when you think about it, and when you actually go back, if you went back and played them, they're not actually good. They are just very good at psychologically convincing you to spend money and keep playing. So
Yeah.
that is another thing.
Yeah.
The next slide, let's bring that one up. So we've got a couple of examples here of some media that's gone missing. Aaron, do you want to walk us through this one?
Well, this is really interesting. It does sort of cross over with what we were looking at last week with missing film media as well. But some of the specific digital media that's gone missing is stuff that's filmed exclusively for theme parks and theme park rides, where you might have a ride and part of that ride is an interactive video with the audience. And once that ride is gone, a lot of companies do not bother to keep that media. So the only thing that exists is on people's camcorders as they went through years and years ago. This is taking a bit of a step back though. Some of the stuff that was recorded at theme parks, Disneyland, for example, had Disneyland Studios, and there were programs recorded there. And this is one that freaked me out. There was a program called Mouse Factory. Now, I remember this from my childhood. It was an after-school thing, and there still is a Mouse Factory, but the original one, which I remember after school, started with Mickey jumping off the watch at the start of the episode, and then them all clocking into Disneyland as suited characters, not as cartoons. And they would have a guest host. Under Dickie, we've got Annette Funicello, who was one of the original Mouseketeers. But this was an 80s show that was filmed at Disneyland, and it was basically they filmed linking introductions for cartoons on a theme. Now, the cartoons were all kept. There is only 2 episodes of the actual show that exists. All the others are wiped, or there's only clips of them. And there's some fantastic stuff of Phyllis Diller is one of the ones that exists, and they convert Haunted Mansion into Phyllis's haunted house. And there's all these different views of Haunted Mansion and things like that. But just because it was something I know I used to watch and grow up and come home from school and I grew up with, to find that Disney didn't even have a full archive of their own stuff actually shocked me. And this was just from researching the videos on some of their rides and attractions that haven't turned up anywhere either. They could be deep in the Disney archives, but Disney is saying, no, they haven't, because people have asked for them to be extras on DVDs and Blu-rays and things like that, which is a cool little extra to have. But Disney have said, oh, no, we can't find a copy. They don't exist.
Yeah, there's examples like Captain EO, there's Dreamfinders, which I saw you had up there. Even original versions of theme park rides, like Pirates of the Caribbean originally had the women auction, which they got rid of because they were like, that's not quite politically correct. We need to get rid of that. It's associated with the film now. We want to make money from it. And things like that, where these things that they have just slowly removed over time. And a lot of people have memories of them, and they still are, they should be around, but for whatever reason, they've been vaulted. They've been hidden. As I think, would you remember the vaulting of Disney movies back in the early days of home video, when they'd release it for about a year, and then they'd vault it, and then they'd say, won't get it again for another decade.
Well, it was meant to be the 25-year rule every generation, and that's why they used to use that as their cinema model for releasing stuff, where stuff would come back every 25 years and it was fresh to the next generation of kids. The trouble with doing that on video, technology whipped through so fast. By the time they vaulted it, they weren't going to get another release by the time we upgraded to DVDs and Blu-rays. And I think once they got to that point, they were beyond let's vault it to keep it rare, and changed over to let's sell as many copies as we can to make money. So in some ways that has improved the archiving of stuff. But even stuff that was released on Laserdisc, which was the original sort of format that did go into having extras on, the Laserdisc extras don't make it onto the Blu-rays and the DVDs because things have changed, or they don't have the rights to it anymore, and sometimes that stuff has disappeared too.
Not having rights to things really does ruin everything. Now, I think we've got one or two more slides to go, so let's quickly go through those. So we've got specifically film media, an example being the Back to the Future ride, which at Universal Hollywood, which is
Yep.
now, as I remember, the Simpsons ride.
It is, and it's quite disappointing because although I love the Simpsons ride, the Back to the Future ride was 100 times better. But for those that don't know, when you went through to get onto the ride, often there's a long wait. So they have all these interactive films, and it was Biff and the Doc from Back to the Future. They had the original characters come back, film all this stuff. That has never been released on any home media, and they're not even sure if it exists anymore, but it does exist on people's home videos as they've gone through with the ride. And the next slide is the opposite to that, which is the, oh, sorry, did I not send the Terminator one as well?
Sorry, yes. We skipped it. So,
yeah, the Terminator one was the same kind of thing where there was a big film and they got Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, Edward Furlong, and they filmed basically about 20 minutes of content for this ride. And that was released on the DVD. So it shows you that you can utilize and use this stuff. And it's really interesting to see because it's basically more scenes with the original cast shot by James Cameron, which a lot of people don't know exists, but is there in the extras. So this stuff does have commercial value. It's just so overlooked and sometimes destroyed.
The example I was coming up with was Captain EO, which was a Steven Spielberg production starring Michael Jackson, which apparently every minute of it cost $1 million and it was only about 15 minutes long or something like that. So, and I think that is now available, but for a long time it was very much sought out. Now, the next question is, what do we value enough to preserve? And there are things about the fact that, as we've spoke of already, the internet just isn't being preserved because people aren't thinking to, honestly, because people, again, everyone assumes the internet is forever. Now, we do have some wonderful things like the Internet Archive, otherwise known as the Wayback Machine, which does allow you to access parts of websites from the past. And that is a fantastic effort. If you're ever wondering, if you're ever going to try and view a website that's not there anymore, try the Wayback Machine. It is very useful. But there is a lot that's just gone.
There is, and it's really hard for people to pick what they would preserve, especially when you've got a professional organisation that are tasked with doing this. I think we're out of time, but the best thing we can do is keep the digital media that's important to us because maybe no one else is going to do it for us.
No, absolutely true. Now, very, very quickly, I just wanted to quickly say there is, if you can bring the slide up very quickly.
Yep.
Thank you. The Lost Media Wiki is a fantastic tool which has got a archive and record of all the things that people are looking for and a lot of things that actually have been found, but directly as a result of this online community. Some fantastic games have been found and fantastic other things have been found over time. Some brilliant stuff. But most recently, there was actually a case of a film being found just a week or two ago. It was a holiday special called The Gift of Light. Somebody found a photo from the 90s, a family photo. In the background was a photo of an elf. They managed to finally find it. Somebody was able to locate the data, but it was over a decade of searching, and they finally found it just last week. So there is still hope for a lot of this missing information and missing digital formats. So I'm sorry we went a little bit over today. So I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode, and thank you very much for joining us. If you would like to see more of us, please check out the YouTube page, the Facebook page, the Twitch for our previous episodes. And until next week, have a great one. Bye, guys.
Good night, guys.